with Jamie Ford, Karen Joy Fowler, Andrew Sean Greer, and J. Robert Lennon. And now I will introduce moderator David Abrams. David Abrams' short stories have appeared in Esquire, Narrative, The Literarian, Connecticut Review, the Greensboro Review, the Missouri Review, the North Dakota Review, and other literary quarterlies. His award-winning novel about the Iraq War, Hobbit, was on numerous bestseller and Best of the Year lists in 2012. He regularly writes about the literary life at his blog, The Quivering Pen. Abrams retired in 2008 after a 20-year career in the active duty Army as a journalist. He was named the Department of Defense's Military Journalist of the Year in 1994 and received several other military commendations throughout his career. In 2005, he joined the 3rd Infantry Division and deployed to Baghdad in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He earned a BA in English from the University of Oregon and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He now lives in Butte, Montana with his wife, and he will introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Beryl. Mr. Beryl, even though the youngest guy. So, I'm sure every moderator says this, but I have the best damn panel on this festival. I don't know how the conference gods were smiling on me, or you know what strange alchemy they came up with. But we really have some great talent sitting here at the table with me. And so I'm going to just kind of go through their biographies very quickly, and then I'm going to ask them each to read a short passage from their books. And then we'll just get into the conversation. So I expect it to be a lively one, knowing the personalities of these authors.
We'll see.
We'll see about that. Already, Dukes are already out. Okay, so J. Robert Lennon is the author of a story collection, Pieces for the Left Hand, and 7 novels, including Mailman, Castle, On the Night Plane, and Familiar, which just came out from Grey Wolf last year. Okay. His newest novel, Happy Land, is now available as an ebook from Design Books and Open Road Media. It tells the story of a doll mogul who wants to take over a small town. John holds an MFA from the University of Montana and currently teaches writing at Cornell University. He hosts the podcast Writers at Cornell, and along with Ed Scoop, co-hosts the Lunchbox podcast, which you can witness live in front of your very own eyes this afternoon at 3:30 in the Brooks and Brown Lounge. All right? Okay. Familiar starts with a cracked windshield. Elisa Brown is driving home from her annual visit to her son's grave when she notices that crack in the windshield. And that's when everything changes, and I mean everything. Suddenly she has a new body, a new job, and her dead son has returned to life. Psychotic break, parallel universe, or just a miraculous second chance at life. Familiar is unsettling, haunting, and pretty damn hard to put down once you start. So, Andrew Sean Greer is the author of 1 story collection, How It Was for Me, and 4 novels, The Path of Minor Planets, The Confessions of Max Tivoli, and The Story of a Marriage, and The Impossible Lives of Greta Wells. And he studied writing at Brown University and later earned his MFA at the University of Montana. The Impossible Lives of Greta Wells presents the titular character with 3 versions of her life. Each morning she wakes up in the same room, in the same city, with the same aunt, lover, and brother. The only change is the year in which they're all living, 1918, 1941, and 1985. Andrew cleverly plunks Greta down at pivotal moments in world history, the end of World War I, the eve of World War II, and in the midst of the AIDS pandemic. Each alter ego has its losses and its rewards, and each extracts a different price from the life of Greta Wells. It's a riveting novel about time travel, second chances, and in this case, even third chances.
And the same book that John wrote.
And the same book that John wrote. So it's great that they're sitting here together. They're probably cribbing notes from each other already.
We're like, you wrote what?
That sounds so,
coming out this fall?
that sounds so familiar. Moving along really quickly. Karen Joy Fowler is the author of 6 novels and 3 short story collections, including the best-selling The Jane Austen Book Club. Her previous novel, Sister Noon, was a finalist for the 2001 PEN Faulkner Award, and her collection, Black Glass, won the World Fantasy Award in 1999, as did her collection, What I Didn't See, in 2011. Her newest novel, We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, features one of the most endearing characters I've come across in a long time. Young Rosemary Cook admits she's always been a great talker. As a child, she really gets under the skin of her parents. A father who's a chain-smoking, hard-drinking, fly-fishing atheist from Indianapolis, and a mother who's retreated into near catatonic madness. Rosemary grows up with 2 siblings, Fern and Lowell, both of whom disappear at different times in Rosemary's life. And so, like the other characters in today's books, she goes on a search for her family, herself, and ultimately the slippery truth. Booklets called We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, a deeply inquisitive, cage-rattling novel. If you haven't read it, you must read all of these books, of course. Not telling you. And our final...
We're locking the doors.
Yes, and you have to read them now before you go.
There will be a quiz. Don't just see the movie and think you can get away with that.
And finally, Jamie Ford, last but not least, down at the end of the table. He's the author of the best-selling novel Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, which was an IndieBound Next List selection, a Barnes & Noble Book Club selection, a Penny's Bit at Costco, and numerous other honors. It's been translated into 34 languages and spent 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list. His newest novel, Songs of Willow Frost, which is set in the 1920s and 30s, tells the story of 12-year-old William Eng, who has lived at Seattle's Sacred Heart Orphanage ever since he saw his mother's limp body carried out of their apartment. When he spies an alluring actress on the screen at a movie theater one afternoon, he's convinced it's his mother. And so William sets off in search of Willow Frost, who may or may not be his Alma. Jamie lives in Great Falls with his wife and, quote, more teenagers than he can keep track of. And I should add, among other things, Songs of Willow Frost has moved Pat Conroy to tears. So, you're in for a treat.
It was that bad.
So
We left that out of the book.
So on that note, Jamie, why don't you start us off by moving us to tears? The challenge is on.
I'm going to read this on a, this is not a Kindle, this is a Kobo. Which you may not realize that if you're going to read an ebook, this is probably the most soul-rewarding way to do it, because you can link it to your favorite independent bookstore, so that when you are buying ebooks, that $1 or $2 goes in the pocket of Fact and Fiction or Shakespeare and Company or whoever's in your neighborhood. So anyway, that's my little commercial endorsement. This is just the beginning. Sacred Hearts, 1934. William Eng woke to the sound of a snapping leather belt and the shrieking of rusty springs that supported the threadbare mattress of his army surplus bed. He kept his eyes closed as he listened to the bare feet of children shuffling nervously on the cold wooden floor. He heard the popping and billowing of sheets being pulled back, like trade winds filling a canvas sail, and so he drifted on the favoring currents of his imagination, as he always did, to someplace else, anywhere but the Sacred Heart Orphanage, where the sisters inspect the linens every morning and began whipping the bedwetters.
Stop right there on that. I'm crying already. Karen,
I'm going to read a little section in which my point of view character, Rosemary, contemplates her family. And will remind you that her sister's name is Fern and her brother's name is Lowell. So, she says, in most families, there is a favorite child. Parents deny it, and maybe they truly don't see it, but it's obvious to the children. Unfairness bothers children greatly. It's hard to always come in second. It's also hard to be the favorite. Earned or unearned, the favorite is a burdensome thing to be. I was our mother's favorite child. Lowell was our father's. I loved our father as much as our mother, but I loved Lowell best of all. Fern loved our mother best. Lowell loved Fern more than he loved me. When I lay out these facts, they seem essentially benign. Something here for everyone, more than enough to go around.
Thanks, Karen. Mr. Greer.
All right. Oh, man. I like to think these are all part of one book. They rip the bedwetters and then think about their parents. Stand on West 10th where it meets 6th Avenue in the turreted shadow of the old Jefferson Market Courthouse with its tall tower. Turn until you see a set of iron gates, so easy to miss. Peer through the bars, and there, no more than half a city block, lined with thin maples, dead-ending half a dozen doorways down. Nothing glamorous, just a little broken alley of brick, 3-story apartment buildings built long ago to house the vast waiters at the brig. And there at the end, on the right, just past the last tree, our door. Scrape your shoes on the old shoe brush embedded in the concrete. Walk through the green front door, and you might turn left to knock on my Aunt Ruth's apartment, or walk upstairs and knock on mine. And at the turn of the staircase, you might stop and read the heights of 2 children, mine in red grease pencil, and high above and blue that of my twin brother Felix. Patched in place, the gates locked and painted black, the houses crouched in solitude, the ivy growing, torn down, growing again, the stones cracked and weedy, not even a borough president with look left on his hurrying way to dinner. Who would ever guess? Behind the gates, the doors, the ivy, where only a child would look. As you know, this is how magic works. It takes the least likely of us without foreshadowing at the hour of its own choosing. It makes a thimble rig of time. And this is exactly how one Thursday morning I woke up in another world.
Thank you. I love it. John?
Andy, you've always been so good at reading your own work. I realized I haven't heard you do that in 20 years.
It's true.
It's just so nice. Yeah, world, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
Great.
Oh yeah, we do. This is a sort of a simpler moment in my book. I'm just going to read Andy's paragraph, actually. My character's transformation takes place when she's on a road trip. So this is right before it happens. For now, Elisa isn't alone. Solitude is something she learned how to love, and now she loves it better than almost anything. She loves it at home in her filthy little studio at the back of the house, with her radio and paints, where she goes on her day off when Derek is at work. But she's most alone in a car, on a trip, this trip, with the windows down and the wind and highway in her ears. Or in a storm, windows shut, defogger roaring, the rain thudding against the metal and glass. She doesn't listen to the radio. It's too easy to get invested in something, only to hear it fade away. Not that there's much on the radio to capture her interest. She doesn't like the news. Politics are meaningless to her. She didn't care who won the 2008 election. This disgusted people she knew. But they forgave her because her son was dead, and they figured that had something to do with it. She believes that Silas's death makes people feel superior to her. They decided at some point that it was probably her fault. In any event, her days of worrying about other people's opinions of her are long over. Everything's going to change in a couple of minutes.
Change it does. In fact, all of your books are about change in one way or another, in very radical ways.
Am I hearing a segue?
Yes, very good. I should have music in the background. Here we go. Actually, that was part of the segue. That segue. Okay, so each of your novels involves a character who's searching for clues to the fracture point of their families, and sometimes their own fracture points. So what is it about the stability or instability of families which took you down this path when writing your books? And was it a deliberate choice, or did this plot element or this thematic structure come later, rising organically out of the writing process? And I'll let you guys answer in whatever order you feel most comfortable.
Shall I grab it?
Go for it.
So the family I grew up with was very stable, and which was very fortunate. It was a lucky break on my part. So as I got older,
Doesn't make it easy to write, though.
Where did the voice come from? No, I wasn't suggesting that it would. And now I have my own stable family, and that also doesn't help. But the more I got talking to people as I got older and became an adult, the more I realized the ways in which families fall apart and the ways that they stay together while being broken. And it's become kind of an obsession of mine because I think about, I have my own kids now, and I think about this stuff all the time. The way my relationships with my immediate family change on a day-to-day basis, and it's easy to imagine little cracks, little fissures that sort of heal themselves over every day. In other circumstances, might just open wide and change everything. And so I think that's kind of the gist of Familiar. All I really wanted to do with this was write a sort of semi-sci-fi nerdy book, and it became, with every subsequent draft, it became less about sci-fi and more about marriage and children. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Can I write a fun book? But inevitably it became what most of my other books are, which is people arguing with one another and analyzing the living crap out of every
And from what I understand, it was born out of a time when our own nation was going through immense change at 9/11, right?
Yeah, well, I was actually, and I think that I wrote a little essay about this that is in the back of the Greer edition of this book, and it's on the internet too, if you don't want to read the book, but you do like the internet. Yeah. I got the idea for it when I was driving. I was on September 11th, 2001. I was going on a book tour for a previous book, and my plane. It happened while I was in the plane. So when the plane landed in Chicago, I was going to Iowa City to give a reading. The airport closed like the second we landed, and I had managed to rent a car and actually did the reading in Iowa City that night at Prairie Lights, which was, as you can imagine, the worst reading I've ever given to 3 crying people. But while I was driving home, there was that. If some of you might remember the surreal quality of that week. There were no planes in the sky, for one thing. And it was all across America, it was brutally sunny out. And everyone was driving, and you knew on the highway that everyone was listening to the radio. They were listening to the same cycle of bad news on the radio. And so we were all united in this deeply alienating experience. And it sort of felt like falling into a parallel universe. And then I sort of was trying to. I actually started this book in Missoula in 2002 when I was filling in for somebody in the English department for a semester, and I wrote 50 pages and then I just abandoned it because I didn't know what it was about, and I didn't pick it up again until 7 years later, and thought, oh, this is about my kids now. But I think my kids had to get older for me to realize that that's kind of one of the ways that I was going to express this feeling. So. It came from September 11th. The book is not about September 11th at all, but the feeling of dissociation and disconnection that I think a lot of people were feeling that day was sort of the emotion that guided me toward writing.
Andy, what about you? Where did the fracture point for Greta, for multiple fracture points come?
It's interesting hearing John talk about it because it must be true for all of us that we all think we're writing one particular kind of book. And I know talked with Karen about her book years ago when we first started these. They sounded really different than they are now. They actually are the same book. I mean, for mine it was. Eventually, I had to figure out what would be something. What loss would make a character wish they were in a different world, which is kind of what you were dealing with. And maybe it's the loss of a child. And mine was the loss of a twin, because I'm an identical twin. And I sort of thought that would be, though I take it for granted all the time, one day me and my twin brother are going to have to live in a world without the other one. And we'll have to be alone for the first time, like all the rest of you are. And I thought I would prefer not to live in that world. And that was sort of the family break that drives the book.
I don't think I started thinking about it in terms of a family break, my book was inspired by a psychological experiment that took place in the 1930s, and because there is a big reveal in it, something you're not supposed to know until you're about a third of the way in. I realized, as I started going on the road with it, I guess I realized much earlier as the marketing department started talking about it, that I have actually made it very, very difficult to talk about my own book. Every once in a while read a review that says, for God's sake, don't read any reviews about this book before you read it. Don't let anyone spoil it for you. And I think how tragic it will be when the person who spoils it for you is me.
I was really carefully dancing around.
I know you were. You did a wonderful
No
job.
spoiler.
I'm trying to decide if I should also dance or not. In any case, what I wanted to do was to take this psychological experiment, which happened in the 1930s. I moved it to the 1970s. The actual experiment lasted 19 months. I made it last 5 years because it's something that happened to my narrator in her childhood, and I wanted her to remember something of it. I figured 5 years was kind of the outset of what I could plausibly suggest she had substantial memories of. And the fact that I embedded it in a kind of ordinary family story is sort of the point of the book, that although the people in this family, the members of this family, are unusual in certain ways, the family is still a family and functions according to the emotional rules that families function by. I read recently, Joyce Carol Oates wrote a very long essay about the issues that my book deals with, but also about my book, and said that by focusing on the narrow family, I had prevented myself from writing a bigger story. And I thought, that was my bigger story.
The fracture for me was in my personal life. I always say my writing career began when I wrote my parents' obituaries. And once I lost my parents, once I lost my grandparents, once those doors were closed to me, I suddenly felt compelled to write more historically, to explore their childhoods and the landscape in which they grew up. Because especially my Chinese grandmother, who was this proto-tiger mom before they had a name for tiger moms. My Chinese grandmother actually renamed me and 3 of my cousins. She was this matriarch of the family, and this war of familial attrition just wore down her sisters and literally had her way in every circumstance. But as I look at her early years, when she was 19, she, not only was she a woman in the 20s, so you're already a bit of a second-class citizen, but she's a Chinese-American woman, and she was pregnant out of wedlock. So she was a minority within a minority within a minority. And to go from whoever she was then to the grandmother that I knew, who would have crossed the street to kick your ass, I was curious as to the arc of development of the things that she had to sacrifice, the decisions she had to make to become that person later in life. And so Songs of Willow Frost, it explores a little bit of that world.
And speaking of worlds, I guess, in all of your books, your characters are kind of suspended between worlds. Familiar, you write about Lisa being suspended between 2 worlds, or living in a world that's subtracted one from the other. And then in Greta Wells, Greta describes it as being cut out of the world like a gingerbread man cut out of dough. So did that afford you some really interesting creative opportunities, different paths that you could take?
Well, we're middle-aged.
Yeah.
I
I'm trying to find find it charming, all the complaining about how old you are down on this end of the table.
I think we wrote books that are about what if life had gone differently, not that it's bad now. And a writer friend, when I described my book to her, she's like, Andy, we're all writing that book. I don't know where I was going with that, except, but then also we're outsiders, we're writers, and so we kind of, to write about not quite belonging in the world seems perfectly natural.
Yeah.
And if you can make it supernatural, then you can get away with whatever you want. And in this book, I particularly had to ask Karen how to have someone wake up in a different world. Do you remember this?
I do remember this.
Because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to, I kept having her wake up and complain about it. And like, what is this? This is fake. This can't be real. I'm in a dream for like 30 pages. It's very anxiety producing. And she said, well, Alice just goes down the hole and she says, I want to go through that tiny door into that beautiful garden. And she says, you know, wake up, you see 3 moons in the sky, and you're like, I must be on Mars, but this Martian attacking me is my first priority. You fight the Martian. Mars does not have 3 moons, I know, but, and then you keep going. You never look back and say, is this a dream? I think that's advice. Does that sound like what you told me?
That sounds so much smarter than what I told you. I think you've rewritten it in a really good way. Yes, that's exactly what I told you.
You know, it's a similar experience for me because the first drafts, the early drafts of Familiar spent a lot more time fretting about the nature of the new world. How did I get here? What does this mean? Am I crazy? And she does go, my character does go on sort of a search for meaning throughout, but she's obliquely looking for other kinds of meaning, or is finding other kinds of meaning. Yeah, that's, I have her, what I settled on is I basically have her realize in this other world she has this job, and so she just goes to work and pretends she knows how to do it, and just fakes her way into this life and inhabits it, which is, I think, what happens when our lives break. It's just something terrible has happened and you don't know where to go next, but then you wake up and you have to do something, so you inhabit this new shitty world you're in. And eventually, if you're lucky, it becomes a non-shitty world. But
That's amazing, yeah, same solution. Without caring.
Without caring.
Much.
And Jamie, what about you? William is looking at 2 different worlds, the real world and the Hollywood world, that he sees up on the screen, thinking that's his mom.
Yeah, they have for William, he's led to believe that his mother's passed away, and there's a strange comfort in that. There's a finality in that. But during the Depression, most of the orphanages had kids who had living parents. Sacred Heart was a real orphanage. Wallace Stegner and his brother spent 9 months at Sacred Heart Orphanage during the Depression. And it's especially heartbreaking when you don't know if or when your parents are ever going to come back. Or you see kids at the orphanage whose parents will show up and bring them winter coats and take them out for ice cream, and then maybe they'll see them again. But you never have that closure. And then on the other hand, you have the character of Willow Frost, who you see one thing on screen. She's someone that's transcended her lot in life, who she is as a person, as well as her ethnic background. But we quickly learn that there's a price to pay for those kind of things, and that success does not always equal happiness.
I think I can fit my book into this 2 worlds. Can I try?
Yeah, go ahead. Not spoiled.
Because my character has had a very bizarre upbringing, and because she is well known in the town where she lives, which is Bloomington, Indiana, coincidentally, where I also grew up. Complete coincidence. She has gone off to college and constructed a different world for herself, in which she is not known for this, in which nobody knows this about her. And so in some ways, the plot of my book also follows she's got more choice than the other characters. that, in your old books. But she is in some ways trying to decide if she is in fact happy in this world she has always wanted to live in and has carefully constructed, or if she does in fact wish to return to the person she was and the world in which she lived. I think it is, let me just say that it is a treat to be here with Andy, because we have been talking about these books, because it takes both of us years to write a book. We've been talking about these books for years, and it's fun that they came out so close to the same time, and that we're doing this together.
It's like old home.
It is.
It was fun, and then enough, but like, it was fun to read her book and to see, because we're writers and we read books kind of technically and sometimes miss the fun of them, I guess. But, well, to read everyone's book and see the choices specifically that she made, knowing the problems that she faced and how she solved them all. It's just so fun to be like, oh, you totally nailed it. You totally got it. I know what you did there. And that's why it's fun to know other writers and be on panels and sit and have a drink and talk about the problems of your book, because it's heartening to see someone else suffer. And to know that they worked it out, because maybe you'll work it out too, maybe. But at least they suffered.
That's the key.
It's just, anyway, then I can tell how many books she'd written by how technically she was able to move through telling the story out of order, and Mary's having to decide when to put this reveal, which I know is much further on in the book than the first.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
I'm going to spoil it.
So,
This is how I'm going to spend my plane ride back down to New York.
so without spoiling it, I'm interested. So,
Soylent Green is people!
what it did come earlier in the book?
I didn't move it, yeah. And I did discuss this at some length, I think, on many occasions with Andy. First of all, the reveal involves her sister Fern, and so in my initial writing of the book, I concealed not only the important information about Fern, but the fact that she had a sister at all. And then my workshop was kind of snippy about it. And I was kind of snippy in return, and that's what I remember talking to you particularly about it. I had gotten this very, very bad advice from my workshop, and I was complaining to you about it, and you did not instantly agree that it was bad advice. And I thought, oh, maybe it's not bad advice.
Enough. Enough.
So actually, I'm going to open the floor to questions if you guys have any, if you folks out there have any questions on spoilers or process or families, fractured or otherwise. Shout out, raise your hand. Actually, raise your hand politely. We're all polite here in Montana.
This is really just a love note. I'm Karen, I read your book, and I often read the end books before finishing it, because I get so excited about the plot, I need to know what happened, so that I don't worry.
I do the same thing.
I did read the end of your book, and I was totally blown away with it, and I thought it was absolutely amazing, and so different from the Jane Austen book club that I figured the Jane Austen book club was. I just, kudos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have sort of a question, kind of, if I may. I have come to a sort of point in my life, apparently, where what I'm really most interested in at the moment is siblings. And both of your books, yours does not, because there are no siblings in your book, but both of your books have a lot of sibling issues and energy. And I just wondered, they're not, well, yours focuses on that a little less obviously than Andy's, but it's still, part of what really matters in the book. I just wondered if you, if that's just inevitable when you write about families, or I just felt a lot of the energy in your books were around the siblings.
I'm interested in siblings as a social construct. You know that you're supposed to feel a certain way about your brother or sister, and it is assumed that you do. And if you don't, that's thought to be somewhat abnormal or kind of a shame if you don't get along. Or, I get along fine with my brother, but we're not close in the way I think some siblings are, because we're just very different people. And this relationship is also shaped by the sort of culture of the family as well, the way the parents regard each sibling, and all kinds of, as with any relationship with someone, you have all kinds of resentments and manipulations and, the things that you don't even see yourself doing or see yourself feeling, but you can't get out of it. It's hard to ditch a sibling forever. I mean, most people don't do it. Even if bad things have happened between them, they're stuck. And so this idea that this weird kind of intimacy of the sibling relationship is fascinating to me.
Yeah, you're strangers from together forever.
Yeah.
I have a very weird sibling relationship. I only have one identical twin. We live next door to each other in San Francisco and share a backyard. See each other every day. And we never fight, hardly ever fight. I'm the only one who starts the fights. And it's always, why aren't you doing what I would do? And not if I were you, but because I am you. That's the only battling relationship I have, and it's a problem in my general life because among my friends, I'm like, why aren't you doing what I would do? And I realize now, sometimes other people are not me. Tragedy for everyone. But with my brother, he is me, so I'm like, why are you wearing that? Because we can wear each other's clothes, mostly, and shoes and things, and I just, so I think sibling relationships fascinate me that other people have that I watch, because it's a never-ending dynamic that is not, it isn't that set the way parent-child is. There's certain roles you're supposed to have, and yet you're attached together, which I think is why a lot of people just give up on them. I see that happen, and it seems impossible to make you lose that in your life. But I think I already said that, losing my twin movie, the tragedy I came up with, because I take him totally for granted. If I'm out of sugar, I break into his house.
You've all had very successful books that not a follow-up, but another book following that. And I was wondering if you find it hard to live up to yourself.
Jamie, no, just
Fortunately, my house is filled with mirrors, and I just walk around naked, regard myself at every turn, go to sleep listening to my audiobooks read by me. Second books are hard, and if you've had some success, my greatest fear is that, I call it the Sting effect. Not literally Sting the musician, because some of my favorite musicians, when they were younger and living in a band and had crooked teeth and greasy hair, I liked their music better. And now Sting lives in Lake House. It's not a house on a lake, it's called Lake House. And it was owned by Lord Glenconner and Lady Grey. It's Downton Abbey is where he lives now. I always sort of correlate success to maybe less angst-ridden creative product. And so I went the opposite way. Basically, with the new book, I tried to break my own heart, basically, thinking that people like Trent Reznor write better music when his dog gets run over, that kind of stuff.
You're the one who likes watching people suffer.
Anything else? Yes.
I wanted to ask about plot. when you're conning your novel and you can't get out right in the middle, any advice for that? I used to be in your writing group about 30 years ago, favorites, Karen, we might want to talk out. Anyway, you guys have any input about that terrible middle when you're trying to con your novel?
I can address this quite directly now because, yes, middles I think are just terrible. This is partly why I prefer writing short stories, because you begin and then you end, and there's really nothing that has to happen in the middle. And the middles of my book, my editor, when the manuscript goes in, usually says to me, well, there's a lot of toing and froing in the middle of your book, which I take to mean things are happening, people are running around in great excitement, and yet there's very little sense of forward movement. And I just dislike the middle so very much. I can hardly even discuss it with you. So what I did in this book is that I wrote the middle first. I thought, let's just get it out of the way. It starts in the middle, several pages in. I get to do the parts I like, the beginning and the end. So I don't expect I'll be able to do it for the next book, but I highly recommend it. Just do the middle at the beginning.
Karen, I have a question for you. What percentage of a book would you call?
Would I call the middle?
Yeah.
Probably the beginning is kind of the first 100 pages, and the ending is the last 100 pages, and whatever remains is the middle. Sort of.
I write 200-page novels. Years later, or meanwhile.
For me, plot is, I actually don't have a lot of problems thinking up stuff to happen, even in the middle. My problem is like inventing people for whom it's plausible to have it happen to, or to make the thing that I want to have happen. I often have, I do a lot of character development in my novels, but it's often the desire to see certain things be done that makes me develop the characters into the kind of people who will make that happen. But that's just shifting the suffering to another category of literary endeavor. It's still a big pain in the ass. So even if you solve your plot problem, I promise you that you'll feel the hurt somewhere else. I'm sure.
What about you, Jamie? When you're writing, do you go from B to D, back to A to C, or you go A, B, C, D?
No, I write in a linear fashion, but before I write, I work from a premise and a beginning and an ending, and I find that I get stuck in the middle when I'm not really comfortable with my ending. And some people don't know the ending until they get there. That's the way you like to write. You just may have to get used to being lost in the wilderness for a little bit. I don't like to overplot. I can't. That removes the discovery part, which is the fun part for me. So I kind of beginning, ending, and make up the juicy middle as I go.
In the back. Speak up, go on.
Sure. Writing about families, I'm wondering, how does your own family feel about what you're writing? Do they see themselves in it and react a certain way, or I don't know if
Are your teenagers terribly unimpressed?
or do they see themselves in it and think, were you writing about me, or
My teenagers are wildly unimpressed by me, regardless of what I'm doing. I think it's interesting because I think most of us can attest to this. We pour a little bit of our own lives onto the page, regardless of what you write. You can kind of, you know the writer, you start to see stuff and you recognize it. I know you put, that kind of stuff. It may not be that obvious, but then you have to have Thanksgiving dinner with these people. And, it's weird. I find that the people that aren't in the book find themselves in the book, and the people that aren't in the book, they never recognize themselves.
Somebody just, I can't remember who asked me this last night. I was just talking to someone last night about this very subject that, and I told this anecdote that I recently wrote a short story that I was convinced was not really about my marriage, but in fact it was 100% about my marriage. And And then I didn't realize that until I published it, and my wife read it. And she's like, you are aware that this story is about our marriage, and you just put it on the internet. I was like, yeah, I guess. So she sent the link to her therapist. But she was fine with it. She thought it was quite funny because it's about sort of an amusing dynamic in between us. But my problem is I think that I'm writing fiction, and then belatedly realize that I have just mercilessly poached stuff from people I know and love and who used to love me before I wrote that thing. And it's obviously about them.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, I think my mother will always think that she is the mother in every book except my first novel where she's the main character and she doesn't see herself at all. But otherwise, there are certain people I know in my life who won't mind my stealing everything from them. Luckily, I'm married to one of them. So my husband, I can take everything, every hilarious thing he does, and his mom also doesn't mind at all. And if you collect enough of those people, then you just have a horde of, they'll take anything. Yeah, never mind. But there was about a year, it was a couple of years ago, where I decided to torture my family, my brother and husband and everyone, with, I had this phrase I would use. I would try to give someone good advice, like, you really need to rent a car to drive there because it's too long. They're like, no, just borrow mine, use my car. And I would say, I leave it to you. Leave the rebel dramatically. You'd be like, do you think I should put more salt in this? You really should put some more salt. I'll put it in. I leave it to you. Leave the rebel. Really annoying the crap out of everybody because it's so passive aggressive and arrogant and wonderful to do. But even worse, I put it in the book, and it's seen as a generous thing to say. Yeah. And that means, like, I win. They're not writing books about how annoying I was for that year. But my husband's here, you can ask him about it.
We leave it to him. Any other questions?
I was just going to say quickly that my issue is not that my family recognizes themselves in the books, or minds if they do, because sometimes I do use them, but that my children at least don't wish to have as much information about me as they get when they read the books. And that this has been brought home to me on many occasions, but a very, very clear one was my son is not a great reader, but he has a long commute. And so when the Jane Austen Book Club came out, it was my first audiobook, I gave it to him. And I said, you can listen to this on the way to work and back. And he called me a few weeks later and he said, I don't think I'm going to be able to listen to your book, Mom. And I was startled. He said, I've made it so easy for you. There's no reading involved. He said, well, there's that thing that happens in the first chapter. And I immediately knew what that thing was. It was a very ugly kind of sexual episode. And he said, I know that lots of times writers use their own lives, and I just really can't bear to think that something like that ever happened to you, but I really don't want to think you would make something like that up.
Anything else from you out there in audience land?
I'm going to add to that one thing, just because Dee McNamer is here, and she was my professor in here at MFA school, and she gave us an assignment once that was a family story that I turned into. I wrote the story and sent it out cold to Esquire, which was going through some kind of panic. The intern ended up being in charge of fiction and chose my story. Right, it's like Brazil or something. The typewriter wrote the wrong thing. Greer instead of Graham Greene. And And I was incredibly excited. And I sent it, a copy to my mom, and she said, "You can't publish this." Because I hadn't thought about it. I was just writing, I didn't know anyone would read these. And it told my grandparents' family secret in the story. And I was like, but my grandparents, they don't read Esquire. Except they do that public clearinghouse thing where you check the magazine. So they did get that Esquire. I was like, they don't read it. She's like, they do. They read everything that comes in. You have to change it. And it was a struggle for me because I remember Bill Kittredge had said in nonfiction you have to decide early on whether you're going to hurt everybody around you or not. You would choose, and then you could stick with that decision and live with it. And I was like, but this is fiction. Does the rule apply? I don't know anymore. And I changed it. I gave my husband's family secret instead. That's perfect. Yeah, but I chose not to tell it.
Oh, by the way, I hadn't noticed that you were sitting over there. And I should say, it was in your office that I started writing this book. So, thank you.
Yes, right here.
I wonder, obviously, you're sitting down meetings.
We're stand-up tragedians.
But I want to think about your own opinion of yourself and other writers about the importance of a sense of humor, wit, satire. Not stupid comedy, but intelligent comedy. How important is that? Or can you lack a sense of humor and you're a good writer, or the type of writers that you are needing to write?
Can I grab that?
Please do.
I like this subject. The question for those who didn't hear it is writers with a sense of humor. Is it important for a writer to have a sense of humor? And can you write good books without one? All my favorite books, especially the dark ones, are darkly funny. I mean, there are a few writers who have almost no. Cormac McCarthy, maybe there's not a. And he's very good. But like Crime and Punishment is a very funny novel. It's ridiculous, And a lot of my friends are writers, not just because I'm around writers often, which is so, but I maintain a lot of relationships with friends who are far away, and most of them are writers, and I think it's because writers are worldly, and they sort of recognize that life is ridiculous, and that human striving is absurd, but they also know that it's the only important thing in the world as well, and so I think there are people who sort of not everyone, but I think most writers I know have a personality where they're just naturally funny and forgiving people, and I like that. I can't say that about myself necessarily, but the other people I know are like that, and I adore them for that. And that's part of I think what makes them good writers is because they can empathize with everyone, even the bad guys. But you guys want to address it?
So well said.
Well, thank you.
Kind.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sort of a hobby, one-page story a year writer for my realm of family that we send out just Christmas cards to. I have two people in my family. One's a grammar nut, and the other one loves to be an editor. So once
What lovely people they must be.
So, to what extent do you lend your writing to an editor or to somebody that wants to make sure you're grammatically correct on every word you put in the book?
My degree is in art and design, and so for me, a dangling participle is part of the male anatomy. So I gravitate towards storytelling, and when there's lots of red marks on the page, I wrap that around myself as my defense that I'm a storyteller and not a grammarian.
I have benefited enormously from having wonderful copy editors. I know a lot of writers do not care for their copy editors, and with good reason. But my copy editors have been fantastic. And I also, my degree is in political science. But I did study grammar in junior high and high school, and I would have bet a lot that I had a really good grasp of it. So it's always startling when the copy-edited manuscript comes back, and I'm looking at it thinking, really? That's a rule? That's a rule? You know, a lot of times the voice is a more colloquial one, and so even though it is not grammatically correct, you may choose to stick with what you had, but it's nice to know that it will be wrong and that you will get outraged emails from many, many people about it when the book comes out, which I always think must delight them. I feel of the many pleasures my book has provided, the ability to write me angry emails about my grammar has got to be high on the list.
What about the other two? Are you best friends with your editor or adversaries?
Well, my editor doesn't, I know anything about grammar particularly. She helps me rearrange things in my last two editors, and I would not be able to write the books really without them, or at least have someone to complain to who knows the names of my characters. That's mostly what the editor is good for. When I call her up, she remembers, I'm like, Judy and Kim can't be in that scene because 5 hours before, and she knows what I'm talking about, and no one else would put up with that. It's like why you're a therapist, so your wife doesn't have to remember all your high school buddies' names. You know, the therapist writes it down. But the grammar stuff, if you write your book in first person, you can get away with anything because you're not wrong. Your character just does not, you know. I struggle with the copy editing because I just feel like I'm creating a living language of the human species, and you are dragging this back, you know. But it is good to know that you're wrong, even if you choose to go with it every time.
Yeah. My manuscripts are pretty clean grammatically, and so my copy edits are usually not super heavy, though I get into comma wars every now and then. But I have a good relationship with my book editor, who I think for me I think it's important for writers to know people, have people close to them who know what kind of weaknesses they have and can see through them, see through their BS. My wife was my first pass editor for all of my novels, and she really rips them apart over many glasses of wine and with a red pen, and I couldn't do without that. And I send manuscripts to my friend Ed. My short fiction goes to a bunch of people. My friend Virginia's here, and she gets most of that. I think because people kind of, people who know you well, they know what you do and they know what you do wrong, and they're compassionate enough to be able to tell you when you're doing something wrong, and you can sort of swallow it. But I think if a writer doesn't know how to submit themselves to editorial forces, I think that they should be in another line of work, because you just can't do it all yourself. Whether it's the mechanics of it or the art of it, you're not the auteur that you would like to think that you are. You really need to bounce stuff off other people.
Well, sadly, we are out of time with our wonderful panel today. And before you all go, if you could all let these four wonderful people exit the room so they can go out to the table to sign books where you can chat with them freely. I want to thank John and Andy and Karen and Jamie for a wonderful, lively discussion. Thank you all.